He writes for a number of different outlets, among them, by the way, the Daily Beast, which I happen to be reading this morning. That was a really weird thing. I'm like, holy crap, William Cohan, we're having him on tonight. That was kind of a weird thought. I don't think I've ever had that happen before, where I just randomly stumbled on something on a website. So that was quite an experience. But it's a pleasure to have him on and talk with us about this fascinating book that he just wrote. Bill Cohan, thank you for coming on. Welcome to the FDH Lounge, sir.
Thank you for having me. That was quite a nice introduction.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I wanted to be able to do justice to everything. And with this book here, I'm curious first and foremost how you see it, how you would describe it to people, because in the course of the reviews that I've read and the familiarizing that I've done about this, people will hone in on different aspects of this here. There is an element of it where there are comparisons that are drawn to past 80s Wall Street books like Liar's Poker, Barbarians at the Gate, what was happening the last time Wall Street was really riding this high. So there are some comparisons there. There are some people that will look at this as a little bit of maybe a microcosm of the overall ills of the situation that brought us to this point. The book centers, of course, around the collapse of Bear Stearns and what led to it, but maybe there are some bigger issues that can be drawn from that, and the securitization and everything that got out of control. How do you look at this? What did you have in mind when you went to go write this book, Bill? Were you trying to focus on one element more than the other, or treat a couple of these together? How did you see it unfolding?
Well, the interesting thing is that I set out, I literally began writing the book the day after Bear Stearns collapsed, and even though I worked on Wall Street for 17 years, I was having trouble figuring out how this had happened. And so it was a journey to try to figure out how this had happened and what could have caused the firm to literally collapse in a week's time. And was it something that was preventable, not preventable? Is it something that they could have done something about? Was it their own fault? Was it somebody else's fault? And that's really what I set out to try to figure out. And that's what the story became, trying to figure out how this had happened to a firm that for 85 years had only had one losing quarter, the one losing quarter before it fell apart, and it had been cautious. It survived the Great Depression. It survived World War II. It survived Vietnam. It survived 9/11. It survived all these other crises, and yet could not survive this. So that's what I was setting out to find out, and I think that's what readers will get out of this. They'll get a very full understanding, realistic from the people who were there, about why this happened and how it happened. And it's different than what they think, frankly.
Well, the genesis of it's very interesting, the way that you described it there. At what point in your mind did it start to become something bigger? Because if you started it, at least intellectually, at that point, of course, as you were going through the process of researching this, compiling it, whatever, everything else started falling, to hell in a handbasket in the months to come after that. At what point in time did you come to see what happened with Bear Stearns as emblematic of something so much bigger?
Well, as the rest of Wall Street started collapsing, it was clear to me that the very same reasons that Bear Stearns collapsed were the ones that Lehman collapsed and Merrill collapsed and Citigroup collapsed. And it was decisions made by the managements at the top of these firms over a relatively long period of time that caused them to be put in a position where they were vulnerable to this so-called run on the bank that occurred. And, at first, it was so funny because, as I was interviewing, some of the senior Bear executives for the book, they would, be very concerned that they were going to be portrayed as sort of like as villains here, as the people responsible for bringing down this venerable firm. A little Freudian slip there, venerable, but a venerable firm. And then, as I was interviewing Jimmy Kane over a 6-month period, who was the CEO of Bear Stearns, I don't think I ever saw him happier when Lehman started to go down, because then he could say that, hey, look, see, this wasn't just me. This was the whole system that collapsed. And, I think that might have been convenient for him to say that, But I have to take exception with that. I think it was the decisions that Jimmy Cain made at the top of Bear Stearns, the decisions that Dick Fuld made at the top of Lehman Brothers, the decisions that Stan O'Neill and other executives made at the top of Merrill Lynch, and Chuck Prince and Sandy Weil at Citigroup, that put these firms in a position to be vulnerable. And it's no mistake. It's no coincidence. These firms failed for a reason, not because of some tsunami that came in off the Atlantic Ocean and swept them all away, which is what they, by the way, would prefer us all to believe. But that's not the case at all. That's not what happened at all.
Oh, clearly, yeah, and I tell you what, I like your subtitle, A Tale of Hubris and Wretched Excess on Wall Street, but you could have done worse than From Venerable to Vulnerable, because that is the journey that they traveled across there, certainly. And
that's right.
You chronicle it in some detail here, but you referenced your background as an investment banker on Wall Street, as you were, with the writing that you do for the Financial Times, Daily Beast, Fortune, New York Times, Washington Post, etc. here, and looking at this from all angles, as you've done and worn the different hats in your life that you've done, as you look at this here. Companies like this, okay, they were part, and again, they can't escape all the blame. You're right about that. But they were doing things that other companies did wrong as well here that just played into this bubble mentality here. And these are things throughout human history that we've seen. And doing some research on what happened last year, I came across this. I mean, there were bubbles, notorious, the ones that happened in the last 100 years, even 200 years ago. I mean, what is it about human psychology and about governments that let this kind of thing happen here? These companies always seem to gravitate towards a bubble mentality, and the Fed or the government or anybody else is not really able to do anything about that till it's too late.
Yeah, well, there's no question that these kinds of bubbles have been formed and exploded throughout human history, as throughout the history of commerce, really. And we all talk about the tulips in Amsterdam. I mean, human nature is prone to this, and I can't claim to be I can claim to be like an armchair psychiatrist, and I just think that in our country, which is sort of capitalism writ large, capitalism evolved in its most advanced state. It's very Darwinian, and there's no limit on how much money you can make. There's no limit on how much money you can lose, and I think that just sort of unleashes a certain animal spirit and a desire to believe. And it's something tonight where people are already talking about with the Dow at whatever 8,600 again, that people who were completely pessimistic 6 months ago and thought the world was coming to an end now are of the view that the worst is over and that things are going to get better, and they don't want to miss the next great gravy train. Even though, I mean, the fact of the matter is that nothing fundamentally has been changed in the way these firms do business from 6 months ago, when everybody would have agreed that the whole system was completely broken and needed to be fixed, to now, 6 months later, when the only thing that's really changed is that the Fed has flooded the market with capital as a way to jumpstart all sorts of different business lines, and that nothing fundamental has changed about the way these firms do business. And here, instead of having an impetus to fix what we knew was broken, now the impetus is again to get back on the bandwagon. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. It's unbelievable that it's happened this quickly, that it's moved into this part of the cycle here. And again, when it hit its peak last fall of all of the panic and everything like that, which your book, again, and it's very good that it does this. The final part of your book chronicles the time of Lehman Brothers and of when the country was in the most peril, or seemed like it, in September and October of last year. But the thing that was being said at that time was, geez, we get out of this and never again. This is the big one. We've learned our lesson. Unbelievable. It's not even a year, Bill, and we're back on this.
This is, I couldn't agree with you more. This piece that I had in the New York Times on January 7th with Sandy Lewis. I mean, this is the thrust of this piece: is how could we be losing this opportunity when we all knew how badly broken the system was 6 months ago? You couldn't have gotten anybody to disagree with that. Everybody was scared to death. And now 6 months later, because the Dow has gone from 6,500 to 8,500, we all think it's fixed and better again. It makes absolutely no sense to me, and I honestly I don't understand why the Obama administration has not been more forthright, more forceful in trying to make the changes that we thought they were going to make, that we elected them to make. It's hard to imagine why this is going on like this now.
Well, exactly, and as I look at this, and I look at where we're at right now, and as we're about to see whatever type of remedies may come down the pike, and that's what your most recent column in the Daily Beast ended up addressing here, some of the regulations to come on the financial industry. As I look at this, again, and I come at this personally from a perspective of somebody who's definitely on the right side of the spectrum, free market guy on down the line. But the way I look at this, Bill, is from the perspective of a free marketer, there cannot be anything worse than what we saw last fall with the way that government had to get involved to save the system, whatever. Going forward, it would seem like maybe like a smallpox inoculation or whatever. Maybe if there's a little bit of stuff to try to rein in some of these excesses preemptively, that's going to forestall something like what we saw last fall all over again. Because I would think from the free market perspective, that would be the most ruinous thing, is to have a repeat of what we saw last year, and maybe government hanging on to some of these powers for the long term. So it'll be interesting to me to see how the debate goes, because I don't think it could go along the lines of pure free market versus statism lines here. I think it's a lot more blurred than that.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you, and there's no question that we're well beyond a free market approach to this at the moment. There's no question that the government has decided that all the companies, all the banks are now, they're not going to allow them to fail. They've shown that they'll go so far as to take big stakes in them. They've pumped trillions of dollars of capital into the economy, into these banks to make sure they don't fail and to jumpstart, asset-backed securitization market. I actually think it might be worthwhile at this point to, let those banks that need to fail, so that a recovery and corrections can take place, and stop trying to prop up all these banks just to keep them propped up. I mean, the other thing is, I think we still haven't gotten to the fundamental root of the problem, in my opinion. And this comes as a former banker. I think that the fundamental root of the problem is the compensation system that is operative on Wall Street, that rewards bankers and traders for taking risks with their shareholders' money. And if it's tails, you win, and heads I win, tails you lose, and it's a virtual guarantee that they're going to make money, they're going to get paid a lot by taking risks with shareholders' money. And I think that creates all the wrong incentives, and we need to go back to a system sort of like the partnership days of yore, where the top executives at these firms have real skin in the game, real net worth in the game. Instead of taking risks with their shareholders' money, they have to take risks with their own money, and that will change their behavior. And I'm afraid that this whole 100-page document that the government released this morning, changing the regulations and reining in all these things, I think is fine as far as it goes, but I do not think that it tackles the main culprit here, which is the incentive system on Wall Street. And there's a reason there's been 5 or 6 bubbles in the last 25 years that have all exploded, and we're all sort of having to deal with it every few years. It's because the incentive system is now all screwed up.
Well, and that's a big part of what the free market is all about, really, incentives and disincentives. And if that part of the equation is screwed up, then yeah, what hope is there for the bigger picture? You've said something here tonight that I'm just a layman, but something that I have been thinking for a while now, which is they haven't really necessarily figured out the root cause of the stuff, or maybe the root cause, but what to do about it, I guess I should say, with the banks and these other things here. For everybody who's convinced that we're at a bottom and we're working our way out of it, I'm not sure that every last question about the toxicity of all of the assets on the books, I don't think we know everything there is to know yet about some of these troubled institutions before we can convincingly say that we're at a bottom. Bill, don't we have to have more facts at hand to be able to ascertain that?
I could not agree with you more, and I think one of the most reprehensible aspects of this is that the people who were at the top of these Wall Street firms have not had the decency and the courage to come forward to explain to the American people what they did here and why, what roles their firms had in this and why. And I was advocating that before we let these guys pay back the TARP money, we force these guys who are at the top of these firms to testify, not to be prosecuted, but just so that we know what happened here and why. We want the truth out of these people about what roles their firms played in the downfall of this system, in the collapse of these financial markets. I mean, after 9/11, we had a commission. After the shuttle blew up, we had a commission. After the 87 crash, we had a commission. How come after this we're not having a commission to try and, commissions, they're bureaucratic, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But at least we can find, it's a mechanism to find out what happened, to try to avoid a repetition of this happening again. And opportunity was lost by not forcing these guys to step forward under oath and tell the truth about what their firms did and why as part of this. And I think that's a disgrace. And now they've paid back the money, and they're out from under the thumb of the regulators to a great degree. And I just think an opportunity has been lost.
Yeah, it's not too much to ask for, definitely. And I tell you, and this a question that I knew I had to get to before the interview here tonight, Bill, because, again, this book does such a good job of breaking things down. You've kind of summarized that a little bit here tonight, what Bear Stearns' role was in all of this and everything. But something that a lot of people out there and a lot of people in our audience, I'm sure, wonder about, as far as the circumstances that led to passing the TARP last fall. All of this imminent peril that we were supposed to be in, and I don't say supposed to be with air quotes. I'm not, I'm not trying to be a wise guy about this, but that's just what we were told and everything. But this notion of a potential electronic run on the banks that Representative Kanjorski was talking about in that YouTube clip that had been circulated, what did the abyss look like? Do you have any notion of that? I was hearing things, basically Mad Max scenarios, where like the next day all of our currency's worthless and everything. I mean, what did the abyss look like as best as you can tell?
Well, I guess I'm at ground zero of the abyss because I live in Manhattan, but I think we got a little bit of a taste of it as Lehman unwound and banks stopped lending money to one another and credit dried up for companies all around the globe. And then, of course, when the reserve fund broke the buck, we got a sense that money market funds were not safe, and then people got concerned about whether their deposits in banks were safe. And basically, the confidence just like an air seeping out of a balloon, confidence just ran out of the system. And basically, as I think that was the opening line of my New York Times piece, is that a capital market system that is dependent solely on the confidence people in it is a pretty lousy way to design a capital market system. And yet that's what we've done. And you saw how quickly, when the confidence dissipated, everybody just froze up and they freaked out, and that can lead to a wild deflationary scenario because everybody doesn't want to spend any money, nobody wants to buy anything, everybody's outlook on the future is quite bleak. They think they're going to lose their jobs, and many jobs have been lost, and many more are probably going to be lost, and that is a very serious condition, and the people who are going through that are in for very tough straits, and that means that people aren't spending money, and they're not buying things, and the economy can turn very bad very quickly, and that's basically what happened. And so it was definitely heading down a terrible path, and and reached the nadir. When the Congress voted down TARP 1, remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And that really became, I think, the low point in all this. It was not so much Lehman failing, as difficult as that was. I think the real nadir was when the TARP 1 was not passed, and it probably shouldn't have been passed because it was 3 pages. It kind of made no sense. It wasn't a completely well thought out bill. So and I think things started to improve slowly but surely when that TARP bill was passed and money started filtering into these banks. But again, I'm not really sure we've really addressed the fundamental issues. We haven't addressed the issues of compensation. We haven't, all those toxic assets are still on the banks of these, the books of these banks. And there's very little motion anymore to try to get rid of these assets, and to take the write-downs that are associated with them. So there's a lot of masking going on, in my opinion. There's a lot of, as I call it, the morphine drip, is in the arm of the financial system, and I don't think that's healthy. Sometimes you have to take your pain. Sometimes you have to confront your fears and overcome what you're faced with to improve and get better. And right now I don't see that we're doing that.
Well, Congress being Congress, of course, TARP got a lot more attractive to them once they could lard it up with a lot of the pork that ended up being in the version that passed. But what I want to ask you, Bob, and I guess this is a good final question to ask you here tonight, because, again, the things I'm asking are from a layman perspective personally here in terms of how I look at this, and probably a lot of our listeners. But I would think that most people on a day-to-day basis, and I'll bet you it's the same thing on Wall Street, they have a sense that even if things are going really bad, even if we're staring into the deepest, darkest abyss, that you take the major players and you put them in a room, and Paulson and Bernanke and Geithner and all of them, and they'll come up with something. That there will be something that, again, say what you will about this, but we're not going to turn into Argentina tomorrow where we're pushing a wheelbarrow to the store with money to buy a loaf of bread. Was that what we got to after TARP 1? Was there the sense that, oh my God, nobody's in charge here? They're, at the end of the day, it's just an illusion that there's been a sense of people able to reel us back in if it gets to a catastrophe? Is that basically the mindset that took over on Wall Street?
Well, I think that the 3 guys did get into a room, and they made a bunch of decisions. There wasn't, they decided to save Bear Stearns. They decided to let Lehman go. They decided to save AIG. They decided Merrill Lynch should go into the arms of Bank of America. They decided they needed, $700-800 billion in bailout money. I think, a lot of, and don't forget Bernanke wrote a book, I believe, about what the government did wrong during the Great Depression, how they, instead of taking decisive action, they sort of sat on their hands for a while and made things worse. And he, I guess he decided he wasn't going to be the guy to do that. And you can't fault them for doing nothing. That's for sure. They've done a lot of things, and I think it's also fair to say that we are better off now than we were last fall. Right? The psychology is better. The people feel better. But whether they feel better because of a morphine drip or whether they feel better because they've confronted their worst fears and they've overcome them is another matter. And I can feel great with a morphine drip in my arm, but that doesn't make me confront my bad habits.
Mm-hmm.
That just anesthetizes me, and I feel some of what the government's doing is running towards this anesthetism of all of us and of the capital market system as a way to get it to improve.
Well, that's awful because once the .com bubble imploded, the response basically was to go, blow up the housing and credit bubble and everything. And again, lurching from one crisis to another really is not the way to do this at all. But again,
and that's why I say, you've got to fix the root of the problem, which is the compensation system on Wall Street and what people are rewarded to do and how much skin they have in the game.
Well, I mean, it's a darn shame that something, as straightforward and common sense as fixing a root of a problem could be viewed as something potentially intractable. But that's something we'll be following with your writing going forward, Bill, at such places as the Financial Times, Daily Beast, Fortune, New York Times, the Washington Post. Of course, this book, House of Cards, A Wretched Tale of Hubris and Wretched Excess on Wall Street. It's been out the last couple of months here, selling quite briskly. I hope that your appearance here tonight moves some more copies. Is there anything else that we missed that we should be plugging for you?
No, I mean, you guys are wonderful. Thank you for your help, and I appreciate you wanting to talk to me.